some reading, came across this passage, several passages of Scripture tend to tie together, and I wanted to share some thoughts with you this morning on the subject of the foundations of a happy nation. The foundations of a happy nation. Psalm 144, we want to begin reading with verse 9 down through verse 15. I will sing a new song unto thee, O God, upon a psaltery and an instrument of 10 strings will I sing praises unto thee. It is he that giveth salvation unto kings, who delivereth David his servant from the hurtful sword. Rid me and deliver me from the hand of strange children, whose mouth speaketh vanity, and their right hand is a right hand of falsehood. That our sons may be as plants grown up in their youth. That our daughters may be as cornerstones, polished after the similitude of a palace. That our garners may be full, affording all manner of store. That our sheep may bring forth thousands and 10,000s in our streets. That our oxen may be strong to labor. That there be no breaking in nor going out. That there be no complaining in our streets. Happy is that people that is in such a case. Yea, happy is that people whose God is the Lord. So he sets forth some things here. David lists 7 things, or blessings, that result in a happy nation. He says, happy is that people. And he's talking about a society, a group of people that is in such a case. That is, they have these 7 things are present in their society. The sons, and we're to raise our children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Paul said to Timothy, from thy youth up thou hast known the Holy Scriptures. It says, our sons may be as plants grown up in their youth, or from their youth. Mature, who grow up mature and wise. That our daughters may be as cornerstones or pillars, virtuous, chaste. It says polished after the similitude of a palace. I believe having that inner beauty, not just an outer beauty, but an inner beauty of holiness as described in the Scriptures. That our children, our young people growing up might be such a people. What a blessing, how happy a nation we would be. That our garners, our storehouses may be full. Talking about, prosperity. That our sheep, the flocks and herds, healthy and fruitful. We're not so much an agrarian society, and yet we still depend on crops, herds, flocks. And as in the days of old and the days of David, these were the signs of prosperity and success. That our oxen may be strong to labor. I remember one time hearing some lectures, if you will, on some of the things that made America great. And it had to do with our technology, our ability to take what one man can do and through machinery, through technology, everything, increase that No, the oxen was their beasts of burden, labor. The oxen they yoked to plow their fields. That's kind of like a tractor. You know, we don't use oxen anymore for plowing and doing things like that, but we do use tractors. And the thing is, you know, as a man, you try hoeing and making a row, hoeing it by hand, or if you have a plow and you hook it to an oxen and you let the ox pull it, because of the strength of the ox, the man can do much more labor. And so it's that ability for an individual to be able to do more labor, to his time and his effort multiplied. That there be no breaking in or going out. Not a lot of crime. You don't have to worry about somebody breaking into your house. It talks about thieves break in to steal. So there's no breaking in and carrying off your belongings. A nation where there is little or no crime, there's no fear. What a blessing. And that there be no complaining in our streets. There's domestic tranquility, I think, is a phrase that is used either in the Declaration or the Constitution. I'm showing my ignorance. I know it's one of those two documents. But the law is framed in such a way as to secure peace and domestic tranquility. There be no complaining in our streets. That's domestic tranquility, isn't it? Happy is that people that is in such a case. These things are not the foundations, but they are a manifestation of the foundations being in place. These are the fruits of it. This is the results of it. And obviously, where such results are present, such things are present, that people is going to be happy. Now in Psalm 11, verse 3, we find this verse of Scripture. And there are several of these that I oftentimes have tied together in a thought. And I want to pull this because it mentions the foundations. So if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? And so here David speaks of the foundations. And what are the foundations? And what I understand the word here has to do with the political and moral supports of a society. A society is built upon certain ideas, upon certain principles. And here it combines the idea of both of political and moral. And he said, if those foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? And so this question raises the point of a nation's foundations, which are its political and moral underpinnings or supports, the bedrock upon which the political and moral principles are based. And such a foundation is a foundation by very nature, by very definition, absolute. Absolutes. If our confidence in certain absolutes are destroyed, he said, those absolutes upon which our political foundations are built. And if we look at our own country as an example, these are the ones I'm familiar with. Our founders said that we have been endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Those are some absolutes. The idea that there's a God, that there's a Creator. That's an absolute. And that is part of the political foundations of this country, as well as the moral. That kings and governors and so on are accountable to God. The absolutes are those things handed down to man from God. And we acknowledge that in our founding documents, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that the political structure is there to protect and secure those rights to its citizens. Absolutes. And you cannot get any more absolute when it comes to those things handed down to man from God than the Ten Commandments. That's the foundation of our society. Well, man, today certainly, they'll get upset if you make such a suggestion, but that's not only the spiritual truth, but the historical truth of the founding of this country. Well, and I meant to grab one of my little tracts because it had a couple of quotes in it, and I think that ties into this thought. But anyway, but the Ten Commandments, these are absolutes. Now in Matthew chapter 22 and verses 36 through 40, Jesus is questioned concerning the commandments. Verse 35 says, Then one of them which was a lawyer asked him a question, tempting him and saying, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? And Jesus said to him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it, Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So Jesus simplifies the Ten Commandments into two commandments. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God. So this is the first and the great commandment. And if you look, the first four commandments that he gives are in reference to God, our relationship to God. And the other six is our relationship to our fellow man. And he said, and on these two principles hang all the law and the prophets. And Paul further simplifies it that all of this is based on love. Romans 13, and here we see from the context, he's dealing primarily with the last six commandments, those that love thy neighbor as thyself. Verse 8, he says, Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. And so here he's talking about those last six commandments. For this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. And so we see this as a foundation upon which all our political and moral principles are founded. These are the absolutes, which, when in place, will produce those blessings that David spoke of in Psalms. Notice, if you will, in Proverbs, Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 34. Righteousness exalteth a nation. Righteousness, as expressed in the Ten Commandments. That's righteous. That defines for us what righteousness is. As Paul said, and if there be any other commandment, it's briefly comprehended in this. Righteousness exalteth a nation. As to lift it up, cause it to be successful, will bless it. Righteousness exalteth a nation. Such a nation, the case of the people will be such as what David described there in Psalm 144. Those seven things, number of completeness. Those seven things are the blessings and the results that will cause the people, their condition, their case, to be happy. And that's only because the foundations have been laid. There are some absolutes undergirding that society. Righteousness, as expressed in the Ten Commandments, exalteth a nation. But sin, what is sin? Sin is a transgression of the law. Sin is a transgression of the principles, the ideas that are comprehended in those Ten Commandments. And if there be any other commandment, it is drawn from these 10 and goes back to its foundation is in these 10 commandments here. Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin, he says, is a reproach to any people. It doesn't make any difference who it is. Sin, a reproach is the opposite of being exalted. Reproach is the idea of being brought down in people's eyes and people's esteem and so on. Brought low. Those things mentioned there will be absent. Those 7 things that David mentioned will not be present in a society that is governed by sin, by the transgression of God's law. If the foundations be destroyed, if they be thrown down, torn down, and overthrown. So righteousness exalteth the nation. Notice in Proverbs 29 and verse 2. Again we find, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. When the righteous, those who govern themselves according to the 10 Commandments. And that's where I wanted to get that little tract. And it had some quotes from different ones of the founding fathers and presidents of the past that have acknowledged that our whole form of government is based upon the ability of the individual citizens to govern themselves according to the 10 Commandments. The principles expressed in those commandments. Our presidents in the past have acknowledged that our framework of government, our political framework, is built upon the foundation of the Ten Commandments. These are the absolutes that God Himself has given to man. God who cannot lie. God who is holy and just. He is the very essence of justice. And justice is the very essence of our political system and its leaders. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But bear in mind, those that are in authority are a reflection of the society as a whole. What they approve. It said, but when the wicked beareth rule. And I noticed there's a different phraseology between the righteous and the wicked. So when the righteous are in authority, they're in positions of authority. They don't necessarily seek it out, but are placed there by the people. It said, but the wicked bear rule. There's a difference between those who are in authority and those who bear rule. And as part of the distinction in my mind anyway is that the wicked seek it out. They desire it. They try to obtain it by any means. And of course, once they get it, they want to hold on to it by any means. The righteous are there to serve the people. The wicked are there to serve themselves. The foundations are overthrown. And basically the idea is there is no justice. We have an example of this in the book of Micah, one of the minor prophets. After Jonah. If I can find Jonah first, then Micah. Micah chapter 3. Notice the last statement there in verse 1. Is it not for you to know judgment? He said, and I said, hear, I pray you, O heads of Jacob, and ye princes of the house of Israel. Is it not for you to know judgment or justice? Because that's the primary purpose of judgment. Those who sit in judgment or in authority is to do just, to do justly. Is it not for you to know judgment? Oh, 1 Timothy 2, this reason we see Paul admonishing Timothy. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 1. I exhort therefore that first of all, supplication, prayers, intercession, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all that are in authority. Why? You know, I thought we're supposed to have separation of church and state. Why should Christians be concerned about the politics and who's in authority? Well, a very important reason. He said that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. Now, when you take that statement by Paul, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. And go back and compare that to the 7 things that David set forth there in Psalm 144 and what he describes. Happy is a people that are in such a state. You know, happy is their case. You know, as God's people, we have a responsibility to pray for all men, but also for kings and for all who are in authority. Because the public at large and those who are in authority have an effect upon us that live within that society as God's people. I was talking about this morning in Sunday school that we have a dual citizenship. We're, through the grace of God, have been made fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of God. But we're in this world and we're subject to the laws and things of the land in which we live. And we're admonished to be subject, to make ourselves subject to those laws and to be obedient to those things and those that are in authority. And so, therefore, it is incumbent upon us to pray for those that are in authority, to pray for society as a whole, for all men, and especially for those that are in authority. Because when the righteous bear rule, people rejoice. Because righteousness will exalt a nation. And so it should be our desire and prayer to God for the salvation of these men. That they might know the righteous King, and that they might know righteousness, and that righteousness might become the foundation not only of their personal lives, but also incorporate that into the governing. And we see how the words of some of our founding fathers have been twisted to deny that very thing and to turn aside that very thing. Talking about separation of church and state, that where, it's becoming more and more difficult. And the 10 Commandments themselves are being removed from courthouses and things across the country where they have stood for 200 years. And during that time, the nation prospered and was blessed. And we were one of the happiest societies in the world. But now the foundations are being destroyed. The prosperity is dissipating. The morality is evaporating. And there is violence. And there's tumult in the streets. The foundations have been destroyed. Notice, he goes on to say in Micah chapter 3, and picking up with verse 9, he said, "Hear this, I pray you, heads of the house of Jacob and princes of the house of Israel, that abhor judgment and pervert all equity." He said, you hate justice. You pervert the equity. You twist it. And he goes on to say, they build up Zion with blood and Jerusalem with iniquity. The heads thereof judge for reward, and the priests thereof teach for hire, and the prophets thereof divine for money. The love of money is the root of all evil. And how many times the Scriptures talks about bearing false witness or judging, to take a bribe in judgment, or judging in favor of the one who is wealthy for the favor that you might gain from that, and how this perverts justice. It is not equitable. And so our justice system, which is supposed to be just, and we have the symbols up there of blind justice. That is, justice is not to look upon the wealth or the position and society of an individual, but judge the merits of the case before the law, and the law that all are equal under the law. But that's not what is happening. It seems that if you want to be heard, the person that gets heard is the person that has the most expensive lawyer. And that's not justice. You slice it however you will. But that's not justice. And so he goes down and he talks about if the foundations be destroyed, and here's those that are responsible for those foundations. And it said, and they judge for money, they teach for hire, they divine or give guidance for money. They tell you what you want to hear, they say what you pay them to say. What was it Paul told Timothy over in 2 Timothy chapter 4? Verse 3 and 4 said, for the time will come, and they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. And they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned into fables. So the itching ears, the hireling, they'll pay good money for a teacher, preacher. They'll preach what they want to hear. And at the same time, and this is what really nails it, so at the same time that they abhor justice and pervert equity, and they do these things for money, and yet will they lean upon the Lord and say, is not the Lord among us? None evil can come upon us. Well, isn't that what we hear? We see these problems in our society. We see the absence of the blessings of a society where the righteous are in authority. We see all these issues. And yet, these very politicians will get up and give their speech, God bless America. They're taking the Lord's name in vain when they do that. And that's one of the commandments. We hear that all the time. God bless America. And many of these conservative talk show hosts, I'm not going to mention any by name, but they all pretty much fall into the same thing. If you suggest that the attacks upon America or natural disasters as God's judgment upon America, because America has sinned and turned away from God, they'll shut you down. They don't want to hear that. God is on our side. They talk about American exceptionalism. And they talk about the future is bright for America. And America is going to get better. Why? Because God's on our side. No, God is His own side. He's not on anybody's side. He is the side, and we need to be on His side, and we're not. Bottom line. In God we trust is an empty statement. It's taking the Lord's name in vain. If we as a nation, a church, and even a family would expect and desire to experience the blessings and happiness of a people whose God is the Lord, then we must lay the foundations and build our house upon the bedrock, the absolutes of the Word of God and the Ten Commandments. We need to get back to that. You know, we can't help the direction that the world is going in. We may not even be able to help the direction our own country is going in. But as His people, as individuals, as families, as churches, we can experience God's blessing upon a people. Because we're a people, we're a society within a society. But those foundations need to be in place. We see what happens to a nation when those foundations are destroyed. When sin rules the day and the wicked are in authority. Same things happens to a church when those foundations are destroyed as well. Exodus chapter 20, verses 2 through 17. He outlines those 10 commandments. We have them up here. It's been a while since we've taught through them. But he begins with the phrase, I am the Lord thy God. And that's where it has to begin. Before we even get to those commandments, it has to be, I am the Lord thy God. This is a part of a covenant between God and us as His people. And we have to acknowledge that the Lord is our God. He is our Creator. He is the one that we will worship and serve. Now he says, okay, if you would worship and serve me, this is what you need to do. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. If He is God, He is before all things. And we're not to put anything in a higher place of authority, respect, love, service than the Lord. So, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or likeness of anything. He says with the added idea of saying this is God and bowing down and worshiping Him and serve it. He said, bow down thyself to them nor serve them. See, this flows from the first command, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And Jesus identifies that as thou shalt love the Lord thy God. He is to have our affection, our devotion. And if He does, then we won't be making images. And this is the thing too, if we truly love the Lord, then we will respect what He has to say. Now there's some people that don't like to have a picture taken. And if we really, I may be getting myself into trouble, but if we respect that person's wishes, we'll do what they say. They say, no, I don't want my picture taken. Okay. God has told us, I don't want my picture taken, basically. God is spirit. He says, and what will you liken me? We preached on that a while ago. What likeness can you make of me? I am spirit. And when you make a likeness of something in the creation and compare me to it, you're bringing me down from the Creator as though I'm no better, no greater than some part of my creation which I created. That's what he's, and if we love Him, we'll respect that. And we'll not try to make pictures and say, well, this is what God looks like. Or this, and that, I believe that includes Jesus too. Now, Jesus took upon Himself the form of flesh. There was an image. But man has a way of corrupting himself with images. And if we believe that Jesus is God Himself come in the flesh, then God says, don't make an image. Don't make a likeness of anything. And bow down and worship. And we have an image of some man hanging on the cross, and we put that up there, and we bow down and pray to it. We're violating that commandment. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. We say, in God we trust, or God bless America. How can we, now we can say and pray, God, we can desire that God would bless America. But for God to bless America, we need to be praying for our leaders and those who are in authority that God would save them. That God would raise up men who would raise that foundation, those foundations. We will not take His name and say it loosely or irreverently. There was a song that was popular, Christian song that was a lot of quartets saying, said His name is not just a swear name, swear word. It says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Now in the Old Testament, the Jewish covenant, that was Saturday. But in the New Testament, the new covenant that God has made with us, it's the Lord's Day, which is Sunday, the first day of the week, not the seventh day. But I believe this principle applies. It's the Lord's Sabbath, it's the Lord's Day. We're to keep it holy unto Him. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work therein. But there's one day in 7 that you need to set aside. And that part still applies. 6 days. You have 6 days to get all of your work done in and everything that you need to do. He said, but the Lord's Day, 1 day in 7, needs to be set apart and holy unto the Lord. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Honor thy father and thy mother. This is pointed out as the first commandment with a promise attached to it, that your days may be long on the earth. Now, and it talks about the children there, the sons and the daughters. And what a blessing they are. It's because this observance of this commandment. That's the foundation of our children growing up to be wise, virtuous. Thou shalt not kill, or the word there is commit murder. If you hate somebody without a cause, you have committed murder in your heart. There are times, and even in biblical times, many of the saints of God in the Old Testament took up the sword in war and killed. David is exemplified before us because he killed Goliath. Now, when he killed Goliath, he did not break this commandment. He did not do murder. When Joshua and the people of Israel, when they stoned Achan and his family, they did not violate this commandment. They did not do murder. They were executing justice and judgment. There is a difference. I do believe in and believe the Bible totally supports and demands capital punishment for certain crimes. When God said, the soul that sinneth, it shall die, that's capital punishment. And when Jesus became sin for us, He suffered capital punishment. God forsook His only begotten Son, and He died upon the cross as a judgment for our sins. God believes in and practices capital punishment. Do not use this commandment to set aside that teaching that God has given. It's a perverting of equity, if you will. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Here we see the moral foundations. Murder, adultery, theft, thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Here's another one that gets torqued a little bit. And the Scripture does condemn lying. But this is a specific kind of lying that is being forbidden here. That is, in judgment, bearing a false witness against a neighbor. That is what Jezebel hired those sons of Belial to do against Naboth. They bore a false witness against him, and he was condemned and killed, so that Ahab, I was trying to think of his name, and I was thinking Herod, but I know that's not right. Ahab might have his vineyard. You know, false witnesses were hired against Jesus at his trial. And so this is the forbidding of bearing a false witness in a trial against your fellow man. And then finally, thou shalt not covet. And he lists several things, but he goes, anything that is thy neighbor's, thou shalt not covet. Covetousness, we see, is at the root of, well, Paul says all evil. The love of money, greed, and that's part of covetousness, is the root of all evil. So thou shalt not covet. These 10 commandments. And as Paul says, love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Jesus said, upon this hangs all the law and the prophets. On this principle of love. God is love. He is the truest form and expression of love. And righteousness, and we see, proceeds from love. Doing right, doing good, and abstaining from evil is the essence of love. And on this is laid the foundations of a happy nation. A happy nation. Let us read again. And he says, rid me and deliver me. Basically what he's saying, of false brethren, of those who would be false, those who would abhor justice and pervert equity. He said, rid me of such people. That. And so, before these things can exist, cannot have those that would pervert justice. That our sons may be as plants grown up in their youth, that our daughters may be as cornerstones polished after the similitude of a palace, that our garners may be full, affording all manner of store, that our sheep may bring forth thousands and 10,000s in our streets, that our oxen may be strong to labor, that there be no breaking in or going out, and that there be no complaining in our streets. Happy is that people that is in such a case. Yea, happy is that people whose God is the Lord. Let us stand together.